Hey, I'm Adam. We do daily devotionals for busy Christians. Today's March 9th. We're talking about the unexpected threshold. Let's cannonball right into this thing. In early 2020, my magic career had finally exploded. After years of persistent struggle and countless rejections, a viral TV appearance with over 17 million views completely transformed my life. My calendar was packed with shows. The financial breakthrough I had prayed for finally arrived. Then, overnight, everything vanished. The pandemic erased my entire calendar in a matter of days. Every venue closed, every contract postponed. My gift of gathering people together through the wonder of magic was essentially outlawed. In a world suddenly defined by isolation and fear, magicians became irrelevant in an instant. Fear gripped me like never before. I'd lay awake at night, anxiety coursing through my body, unable to quiet my mind. How am I going to provide for my children? How am I going to afford my mortgage and keep my house? Maybe you know exactly what I'm talking about. Perhaps you're there right now, watching dreams dissolve, plans collapse, and security evaporate. The weight of uncertainty feels crushing and paralyzing. Jesus said something profound in Luke 14:28. He asked, quote, "For which of you desiring to build a tower does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it?" End quote. For years, I totally misunderstood this verse. I thought that counting the cost meant calculating everything and making sure that I had enough resources to prevent failure. But that's not what Jesus meant at all. Here's what I learned the hard way. Counting the cost isn't about predicting every obstacle or guaranteeing success. It's about understanding the depth of our commitment to following Christ, no matter what the circumstances that arise. To count the cost means accepting that following Jesus doesn't exempt us from hardship. In fact, it leads us directly into storms, and those storms reveal our true foundation. The trials we face aren't evidence of God's absence. They're invitations into a deeper faith. The moment when everything falls apart is often the precise moment God begins his most beautiful work. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, Paul shares God's words to him. Quote, "My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness." End quote. See, I never got it. I never understood that until my own strength and resources were completely depleted. It was only in that place of utter dependence that I discovered the sufficiency of God's grace. When everything falls apart, where do you turn? When plan A dissolves and plan B seems impossible, what becomes your anchor? In my darkest moment, after losing my entire career overnight during the pandemic, I turned to God in desperation. Not the polished, presentable prayers I'd often offered before, but raw, unfiltered pleas from a place of complete brokenness. I remember that night vividly. I sat alone in my living room after the kids were asleep, tears streaming down my face, begging God for even the smallest spark of hope to guide my next step. Just one hint that he hadn't forgotten us, one indication that there was a way forward. That night, silence greeted me. Not clear answers, not comforting whispers, not miraculous provision. I fell asleep feeling abandoned, wondering if God had closed the door on this chapter of my life entirely. But when I woke up the next morning, an unexpected call really did change everything. A friend, someone who had no idea of my desperate prayer the night before, excitedly shared that he'd booked a virtual show for his company, and he wanted my advice on technical setup. Virtual show? I remember asking. The concept completely foreign to me at the time. That simple conversation sparked something. In that instance, the hope I'd prayed for ignited within me, not as a booming voice from heaven, but as a quiet possibility whispered through an ordinary phone call. God had answered, not in thunderous clarity, but through a quiet, unexpected conversation with a friend who had no idea he was being used as God's messenger. With newfound hope, I poured every last dollar of my savings into creating a home studio for virtual performances. I worked around the clock, learning new technology, adapting my show for a screen, experimenting with camera angles and lighting. What seemed like the worst moment of my career became a pathway forward towards something remarkable. For the next 2 years, God provided abundancy through virtual magic shows, connecting me with audiences worldwide in ways that would have never been possible through traditional performances. Psalm 18, verse 19 says, quote, "He brought me out into a broad place. He rescued me because he delighted in me." End quote. That verse became my testimony. When I felt trapped in an impossible situation, God wasn't just solving my problem, He was expanding my territory. Here's what I'd love for you to understand today. We await grand revelations from God, when in reality, He speaks through gentle whispers, like an unexpected phone call or a casual conversation. We look for burning bushes when God is speaking through ordinary means. God rarely works how we expect Him to, but He always works. Sometimes our greatest setbacks become the foundation for God's greatest work in our lives. The very thing that threatens to destroy us becomes the catalyst for a divine purpose that we never could have imagined. I mentioned a home studio that I built out of desperation during the pandemic, the one that represented my last-ditch effort to save my magic career. Today, it's become so much more than just a space for virtual magic shows. God transformed it into a sacred space where I can now share my testimony through magic and storytelling, bringing glory to Him and encouragement to churches and believers everywhere. Before the pandemic, I was primarily an entertainer who could occasionally mention my faith if it felt safe and secure. Today, I'm a guy who uses entertainment to illuminate biblical truths, and the shift has been profound and unexpected. What seemed like a career-ending crisis became the very thing that God used to expand His kingdom in ways I never could have imagined. The studio that saved my livelihood became a platform for my calling. Isaiah 61:3 speaks of God giving, quote, beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness, end quote. I've seen this promise fulfilled tangibly in my own life. The ashes of my former plans became the soil from which something more beautiful and impactful could grow. This transformation didn't happen overnight. There were months of struggle, doubts, and questions, times when I wondered, did I make the right choice? Moments when I had longed for that security of my old life. But looking back, I can see God's hand clearly guiding each step. Even when the path seemed darkest, He wasn't just solving a temporary problem, He was orchestrating a complete redirection of my life and purpose. The Apostle Paul wrote in Romans 8:28, quote, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to His purpose, end quote. Notice it doesn't say all things are good, but that God works them together for good. The painful, confusing, and challenging circumstances, they're not erased from our story. They're redeemed as a part of it. This is what it means to count the cost and follow Jesus anyway. It means letting go of our tight grip on security, on control, and predictable outcomes. It means trusting that even when life radically shifts, God's purpose remains steadfast. Friend, if you're weary from uncertainty or burdened by today's tensions, know that counting the cost isn't about avoiding pain. It's about discovering purpose in every single circumstance. Once again, my name's Adam. Thanks so much for being here. As always, my friend, onward, and God bless you.